This is the door that leads to the underground cells. Oh my god, that looks a bit creepy. Hello there, welcome to Secrets of London with me, Mark Munro, and today I'm off to the site of what used to be Britain's largest prison. It existed right here in the centre of London, and you're going to find the story behind this prison very interesting indeed. So jump in, let's go. Obviously, the prison isn't there anymore. It was opened up in the 19th century, but embedded in and around the streets and the roads where that prison used to be are still reminders and actual physical elements of that prison that still exist. But first of all, let's go and find out exactly where that prison was. I've arrived in Pimlico. I'm on Milbank. The River Thames is right in front of me there. Now, a lot of you might recognise this famous gallery behind me, the Tate Britain. It was opened in 1897 and at the time was Britain's national gallery. But what you might not know is that it stands on the site of what used to be Britain's biggest prison, the Milbank Penitentiary. The Milbank Penitentiary was opened in 1816 on the marshy banks of the River Thames. Its design, however, was not straightforward. A hexagonal central courtyard with elongated courtyards up to the outer walls. Each pentagonal courtyard had a tower 1 story higher than the rest of the building. The prison first opened to female prisoners, then a year later the first men arrived. Most of these convicts would be up for transportation to Australia. Milbank Penitentiary was the largest prison in Britain when it first opened, but it was not without its problems. Conditions in the newly built complex were atrocious. Minimal rations of bread and water, 5 minutes of exercise a day, and cruel wardens who thought nothing of increasing the day-to-day suffering of the prison inmates. However, the convicts' worst enemy wasn't the wardens, it was disease. A cholera outbreak in 1824 meant the prison had to close, meaning many of the prisoners were sent to hulks, floating moored ships at Woolwich. By May 1843, the prison had sunk into such filth and squalor that it was no longer deemed fit for holding inmates. The model prison role was to be taken over by Pentonville Prison on the Caledonian Road, with Milbank demoted for general convicts awaiting deportation. So, what remains of the old Milbank prison? Well, I'm going to head round to the back of Tate Britain onto a street called John Islip Street. Along that street lies clues as to the existence of that old Victorian prison. The Milbank prison was a concrete colossus. It was heavy and it was sinking, which isn't surprising as it was built on marshland. So at one point it was decided that the moat around the prison should be concreted over. At the bottom of John Islip Street here still exists the original, well, part of the original concrete moat. Let's go take a look. And here it is, hiding in plain sight behind Wilkie House. The Milbank Penitentiary moat. You can still come and see it today. It's now used by the residents to hang out their washing and do some gardening. But yeah, it's amazing to think that this concrete is hundreds of years old and was laid down to stop the moat disappearing into the ground. Whilst the prisoners over there were suffering in horrendous conditions inside the prison walls, the wardens, however, were living here on purpose-built dwellings on Ponsonbury Place. This has since become one of London's most affluent streets, and at the end of the street was a pub that was built to cater for the wardens' social life. It's called the Moat Arms, and underneath that pub lies another secret that's related to the Milbank prison. The pub was opened in 1845, like I said, to look after the wardens after a hard day's work. But what exists underneath are still some of the original holding cells that held the convicts the night before they were put on transportation ships over the road here to be taken off to Australia. And I've been given permission to take a look at these holding cells, which are underneath the Moat Arms. Let's go take a look. This is the door that leads to the underground cells. Oh my god, that looks a bit creepy. Wow. A little bit. I don't think I'll be going that far. Time to turn back. These cells, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, were linked by a tunnel to Milbank Prison. So the prisoners never got above ground to get to these cells underneath the Moat Arms. They look probably about 8 foot wide, and there would have been more than one prisoner here, of course, men and women crammed into these holding cells. And it's an incredible juxtaposition to know that above the wardens would be drinking, enjoying themselves. After spending their last night on British soil in holding cells below the Moat Arms, they would be taken above ground, still shackled, and marched over there to an awaiting transportation ship that would take them on the 3-month grueling journey to Botany Bay. The transportation ships would be waiting here on the river bank. Of course, the Milbank Road wasn't here at all, that didn't exist, and there would have been steps down to take the convicts onto the ship. They would have been registered and given a health check. And the reason we know why this is the exact spot the transportation ship's moored up is because this capstan, this buttress, still survives and was the holding post for the mooring ropes of the transportation ships. And there's still a plaque on this buttress, this capstan, that describes what went on around this area in the 1900s. Near this site stood Milbank Prison, which was opened in 1816 and closed in 1890. This buttress stood at the head of the river steps from which, until 1867, prisoners sentenced to transportation embarked on their journey to Australia. One can only imagine what degradation and filth these prisoners had to live in below decks on these transportation ships. Some of the convicts were shackled to their beds, having to sit and lie in soiled and filthy sheets, at the same time trying to avoid disease at all cost. And remember, there were women aboard these ships as well. I can only imagine what humiliations they had to endure.
If the convicts made it to Australia in one piece and hadn't died on the way, they were referred to as POMs, prisoners of Milbank, a term that's still used today by Antipodeans to describe British citizens. Thanks for watching Secrets of London with me, Mark Monroe. More hidden treasures of London coming soon, so remember, stay tuned.